The Texas death penalty. The death penalty is a controversial issue in America. It not only gives criminals a death sentence, but those who are wrongfully convicted may never stand the chance. Giving an individual a maximum life sentence is far more justice than getting out free with a lethal injection. They deserve to rot in their cell for their committed crime. The history of the death penalty. This was established in the 18th century BC in the Code of King Hammurabi of Babylon, which covered 25 crimes of the death penalty. In 1835, the state of Texas began hanging criminals on death row with a piece of manila hemp rope. First to ever use the lethal injection in 1982 was Texas, and is the first to hold many executions in the U.S. since 1976. What is Texas's reputation over it? Texas is known as ground zero for capital punishment. Cultural tradition of exclusion, which started by the South by dehumanizing certain people groups, which made it easy for Southerners to separate themselves from those who didn't go by the normal way in society. Public opinion. The death penalty differs by religion, race, party, and education. Republicans are more in favor of the death penalty than Democrats, and those who aren't as educated are more in favor to support it, compared to 63% of college students that disagree with it. Exonerations. Over 18 people in the U.S. have been proven innocent and have been exonerated through DNA testing after serving time. In 1989, the first DNA exoneration occurred. Around 44 individuals out of 375 plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit. Since 1989, there have been numerous cases of suspects who were investigated before DNA testing was established, proved to be wrongfully convicted. It takes 14 years and well over $235,000 to get a wrongfully convicted person out of prison and reunite them with their family. The exoneration of Claude Wilkerson. In 1979, Wilkerson was convicted based on a confession that violated his constitutional rights by making a false confession. He allegedly held a woman captive, chained to his bed, and raped her, as well as murdering 3 people. Almost 40 years later, he's a free man, since the court found evidence against the court due to the violation of his constitutional rights. Financial burdens of the death penalty. In Texas, a death penalty case costs a total of $2.3 million, which is 3 times more the amount of imprisoning someone in a jail cell at the highest level of security for at least 40 years. 3 Texas death penalty cases. Wrongful conviction of Liddell Grant. Grant was convicted of murder in 2012 and sentenced to life in Harris County Prison. He was exonerated on May 5th of 2021. Grant was convicted of stabbing and killing a man from a local nightclub in Houston, Texas. Grant was pulled over by the police and discovered a wig, ski mask, and a knife in his trunk, but wasn't associated with the crime. Based on witness reports, Grant was charged with the first-degree murder. In Grant's defense, the DNA results under the victim's fingernails showed 2 different individuals, and his eyewitnesses claimed they spent the whole night with Grant. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 2019, Grant was released on bond due to new DNA testing results showing his innocence. After being released, the suspect confessed that he was involved in the stabbing and killing of the victim and claimed that Grant did not participate. The Houston Police Department apologized to Grant and his family for the injustice of the court, which established a state law petition of habeas corpus to the trial court to ask that Grant's conviction be lifted. The writ was approved and sent to the Court of Criminal Appeals. May 19, 2021, the Court of Criminal Appeals granted the writ and lifted Grant's conviction. A possible solution for proving innocence. By ending the death penalty and substituting it with a life sentence, By doing so, this could help those who are innocent prove their innocence. Those who are wrongfully convicted live on death row without the chance of claiming their innocence. Posthumous exoneration. In 1949, 7 black men, Francis DeSales Grayson, Frank Hairston Jr., Howard Hairston, James Luther Hairston, Joe Henry Hampton, Booker T. Milner, and John Claiborne Taylor, were all accused of raping and beating a white woman in Martinsville, Virginia. Each of the men were sentenced to death and were executed in 1951. 70 years after their executions, they finally received a posthumous pardon. Virginia adopted a bill that abolished the state's death penalty. A pending death row case. Brad Keith Sigmund, who is 64 years old, is set for execution on May 13th. Sigmund is sentenced to death for 2 counts of murder and first-degree burglary in 2002. Under the South Carolina Department of Corrections, Sigmund will be asked which 2 methods of execution he prefers, the electric chair or the firing squad. Evidence that the death penalty doesn't deter crime. A study in the U.S. presented the average murder rates in the states that use the death penalty still are much higher than those states that don't. In Canada, the murder rate declined after the death penalty was abolished in 1998. People that commit heinous crimes are either not thinking logically about their consequences or who don't care about their own safety. Under our constitutional right. The death penalty violates our human rights to an extent. Everyone is entitled to life, liberty, and security of person in Article 5 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or the prohibition of torture, inhumane, and degrading treatment, Article 3. Even though this is for criminals who commit vicious crimes, it still goes against their right to life. The Eighth Amendment. The Supreme Court determined the death penalty does not violate the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel punishment, but it shapes the aspects when a jury decides to use the death penalty and how it should be addressed. Due to the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, the 8th Amendment applies against the federal government and by the states. This requires the courts to consider the decency of a punishment to decide whether or not the crime is punishable.